Punchout! Punchout! It's just a small series in Nintendo's arsenal of games. You play as a tiny boxer named Little Mac, and you fight against the biggest beasts of men you've ever seen. But what drives Little Mac? What motivates him to join the WVBA? That's the West Virginia Broadcasters Association. That doesn't make any sense. It's actually the Washington Volleyball Academy. No? Actually, it's the World Video Boxing Association. Well, according to the various game guides, Little Mac is a very strong opportunist, and the WVBA is very beneficial to younger fighters. That seems like a less than wholesome reason for a main character. Not really something you'd want to root for. It's like cheering for your favorite sports star after he purposely crippled his rival in order to face no competition. That's taking an opportunity, and likely he's too famous to face major consequences. Well, what I'm about to tell you may be the real reason. A reason that makes much more sense for a main protagonist to use as motivation. Punchout Wii is nothing more than a metaphor, taking place in the mind of Mac. But that doesn't mean that the game is only in Little Mac's mind. Heavens no. Little Mac is still a boxer. He still trains, he still fights, and he still wins championships. The only thing that we aren't seeing are his actual fights. Allow me to explain. Look at all these fighters. Not a single one of them is a simple, down-to-earth boxer, like Little Mac. None of them are, quote-unquote, normal. All of them are extremes. Extreme stereotypes, extreme character and personalities. If we put someone like Super Macho Man in an MMA fighting ring, his personality and fighting skills would surpass even Jon Jones. None of these fighters are actually what Little Mac is going up against. In reality, instead of fighting Disco Kid or King Hippo, he's fighting Basic Billy and Normal Boxer Norman. But why? Why is Mac imagining this stuff? Hallucinogens? Knocked into a coma? Is there something wrong with him? Yes, actually. I believe that Mac has all sorts of problems, and each one peaks up on him at a different point in his life. And that mental problem is represented in the form of his latest in-game opponent. So let's go through his opponents and find out which mental disorders they each represent. But first, let's look at Little Mac himself. Emphasis on little. Tiny. Minuscule. Twerp of a short person Mac. Mac doesn't ever... Mac doesn't ever speak. He doesn't even smile all that often outside of those rare moments of victory. Due to his height and size, he was most likely teased and bullied in high school, which he's just out of, by the way. He's 17. Yeah, 17 and that ripped. But sadly, this is often seen as overcompensation for one's height. But at the end of the day, it still leads to a sadly very common problem with many. Depressive disorder. Depressive disorder matches with his first opponent, Glass Joe, extremely well. Those with major depressive disorder have feelings of worthlessness and rarely ever exhibit pleasure, even in activities they once thought were great. Glass Joe barely ever fights, constantly asks for naps in between matches, and continues to threaten to retire. Another trait that he and Mac may share is his general anxiety disorder, which Glass Joe demonstrates by his fear of getting struck in the jaw. Mac needs to beat this mindset out of himself and take control of his life, and he does so. But then, even after battling depression, he comes up against Von Kaiser and his acute stress disorder. Acute stress disorder is similar to post-traumatic stress disorder, though not quite as severe. In this game, it is extremely exaggerated and played for laughs. Von Kaiser has flashbacks to when he was humiliated in front of school children, and he worries that someone will find his weakness and expose it. Von Kaiser truly is a strong representation of acute stress and its effects that occur upon someone. Even if Little Mac has fought back his depression, there are still strong instances of acute stress in his life, flashbacks, and Little Mac must learn how to fight this off as well, or else it will cause him to worry about his shortcomings, and become distracted in his fight, just like Von Kaiser. After his 2 bouts, Little Mac comes to Disco Kid.
Ready for this?
Now we could mark DK down for ego-dystonic sexual orientation. No, not you. We should try to focus on a more possible disorder that Mac could be facing. ADHD comes to mind. Right after battling all these bouts with depression and acute stress, Mac would have a hard time concentrating on his fights. So Disco Kid is suddenly brought in with his constant dancing and believing he's more in a dance club than a fight. Disco Kid is made to teach Mac how to get back into the fight and keep his focus there.
Here it comes. Oh!
Because if he doesn't focus, he'll be destroyed. Now, Mac may have gotten a stronger hold on his life, no longer depressed or having random bouts of acute stress, and no longer being constantly distracted with ADHD. Mac begins to lighten up, or at least, heavy up. Mac becomes obsessed with protein in order to build his muscle and match the much stronger competitors. However, Mac can't handle the calories, and must face with King Hippo, who does nothing but eat food all day. If Mac can't get a hold of his eating disorder, he will become fat, which in turn will cause him to be humiliated once again by his much fitter opponents. To prevent this, he and Doc Lewis, his coach, and possibly psychiatrist, start counting his calories and nutritional intake. And Mac takes it religiously. Mac ceases his upcoming weight gain, but all of this attention to detail causes yet another problem. OCD. After eating all that food with such obsessive precision, Mac becomes a tad more paranoid and distracted. He focuses more on getting punch combos perfect, always thinking hard. This makes him victim to poor poker face. All that concentration and thinking inside of your head often will allow others to see what you are thinking through nonverbal communication, facial expressions. Enter Piston Hondo. Piston represents this same problem that Little Mac is constantly facing at this point. Piston, too, has poor poker face. His eyebrow raising gives away his next attack, every time. Little Mac must learn to defeat this habit in order to move on and become a Pokemon Master. A poker face master. Poker face. And Little Mac does just so. However, somewhere in his career, Mac is becoming untrusting to anyone but Doc Lewis, leading him into a poor direction. He's becoming a misanthrope, someone that leads themselves away from all mankind, aside from having the occasional boxing match. Misanthropes and sports don't really connect, and the combination of these two things leads to Bear Hugger.
Well, let's see now. I can't start until I find my little, here, where are you? There you are, you crazy little...
A misanthrope who was trained by a bear and a squirrel. Mac needs to fight off the urge of misanthropy and defeat Bear Hugger before he begins to act just like him. Unfortunately for Mac, fighting back all these problems isn't always easy. You often have to fight any recurring phases until you ultimately defeat that phase. Little Mac again defeated depression and had a rematch with acute stress. Now Little Mac has lived the life of a misanthrope boxer for a good period of time now and can't comprehend what's true in the world. Even his fighters start turning into strange hallucinations that mess with his mind before he can find the path back to normalcy. Little Mac has schizophrenia. Enter Great Tiger, the disappearing, cloning boxer who uses his magician skills to fool Mac into attacking fake Great Tigers while the real ones clobber him. However, fighting back with his immense willpower, Mac eventually gets a hold upon his mind and KOs the metaphoric boxer, ending the tyranny of unhealthy mentalities that has plagued his mindset. And just in time to become the #1 contender for a major title. Little Mac has finally reached a standard mindset. He's normal now. But even those with normal minds may face some potential problems. Mental problems that sneak up and prey upon the normal minds of successful individuals. My friends, let me introduce you to the Foolish Five. First comes a fighter and fear that all fellows will eventually face. Mr. Gerontophobia, or as Mr. Nintendo likes to call him, Don Flamenco. Donnie is a gerontophobe. To the fullest extreme, the fear stems from his unfortunate case of premature baldness, which he covers up with a toupee. Because of this, He fears becoming older and staler and having those younger than him triumph over him. Donnie wants to remain an object of lust to women like Carmen. This is an incredibly common feeling for media stars, which Mac has now become, but Mac still has plenty of years left in him. He's only 17. It isn't healthy for him to think about this. He realizes this and defeats Don and moves on. But Mac slowly becomes bitter. After victory upon victory and claiming a major circuit title, his brain gets more full of itself and has him believe that he can do whatever he wants, including cheat. That's right! The reason Aaron Ryan has planted himself into Punchout Wii is to illustrate Little Mac's conduct disorder.
Dramatic reverb.
Now, Mac probably isn't cheating as blatantly as Aaron Ryan is, mind you. He probably just forged some paperwork, failed a health test, and forged it to seem like he passed. But he seems really fit. Which health test could he have failed? We'll get to that in a second. Now, since we're mentioning the fighters brought in from Super Punch-Out, Bear Hugger was clearly brought in for great marketing value, and to establish Little Mac's misanthropy. But out of the rest, why Aaron Ryan? The answer is clear. The reason Little Mac has conduct disorder in the first place has to do with Aaron's home country. Ireland! Home of the wee leprechauns! Pale white warriors who'll kick your face off! And doesn't afraid of anything! And most of all, alcohol! Part of this complete breakfast! And you know what other country and fighter has a big alcohol kick? Russia and Soda Popinski, also known as Vodka Drunkinski. Aaron Ryan's placement was because of the parallels he has with Soda Popinski. Little Mac really had to defeat these two together. Soda Popinski's obvious drinking problem leads to the failed health tests and the conduct disorder of Aaron Ryan, making Mac a mess as he fights off two of the Foolish Five at once: underage drinking and cheating while at the top. Thankfully, a couple of rehabilitation sessions and KOs later, Mac is back on his feet and ready to go back into the ring. But the media is not going to just let him walk away from that little bit of controversy he was eventually caught in. The media begins to hound on Mac and prey upon a huge disorder he's got: social anxiety disorder. Think about Little Mac. He does nothing but hang out with Doc Lewis. He's never really been around too many people at once. And in Macho Man's...
Oh yeah!
I mean, in Super Macho Man's title montage, Little Mac can't really handle all the attention he's given, and now must brawl against becoming another fighter, Bald Bull. Bald Bull also has social anxiety, as seen in his montage, but in response, he shows off the mental disorder he represents: intermittent explosive disorder, which basically is... Little Mac must defeat Bald Bull by keeping control of his temper, not letting his anger get the best of him. If Little Mac can't defeat Bald Bull, then he may possibly become him. At this point of Little Mac's career, he's done a lot, beaten a lot of boxers on the inside of his head, and beaten a lot of boxers on the outside, in the real world, against real boxers.
Little Mac couldn't make his feelings any clearer. He thinks he outclassed his opponent, and after that display, I might be inclined to agree.
While he's experienced being full of himself before, he now finds it's even harder not to be. People look up to him, lust over him. He's gotten lots of promotional offers, lots of dough. He's so close to the top, only 2 more to go. But if he sets aside his training, it will all be for naught. He has no time to be full of himself, so he punches that narcissism that Super Macho Man represents right out of his head. And now, Little Mac has done it! He's battled through depression, fought to keep his body healthy, saved his mind from bouts of insanity, and has triumphed over the Foolish Five. But there's one more foe to beat.
In this corner, it's Sandbag! Oh! I meant Sandman.
Mr. Sandman, being the final boss, is the real kicker to this viewpoint of the game. Look at him. He clearly is the living, breathing, walking, talking version of an inferiority complex. Indeed, Mr. Sandman is nothing but a human inferiority complex. For Mac, it's even in his name, Mr. Sandman. Sandman is the one who puts you to sleep. Mac dreams of becoming this guy, but he'll never look like Sandman. Sandman is tall, dark, intimidating. Mac is short, paler, and while he's trying to look scary, you gotta give him credit for trying. Sandman is Mac's final opponent because Mac needs to finally accept who he is. Little Mac is a great fighter going through tough times because of his various mental problems and inferiority. And the final step to accepting himself is to prove that he, Little Mac from Bronx, New York, is better than any fantasy he could ever have, and has all the qualities of a boxing champion. Little Mac has gone through many obstacles, physical and psychological, to not only become the WVBA champion, but also to finally accept himself for who he is, flaws and all. And you, the player, also go through the thrills of Little Mac defeating his mental foes. You get to feel like Mac, standing side by side with him as you face off against the obstacles that you too may have to fight later in life. And if you do find yourself fighting them, think like Little Mac. Admit the problem, fight it, and punch it right in the jaw.
But what about Smash Bros? What about the secret character Donkey Kong? What about Little Mac's retirement? By the way, spoilers.
Easy, easy, easy. All of that is still extremely relevant to Little Mac as a character and his history, but as far as the main campaign of the game, and thus as far as this theoretical view of it is concerned, Mac still gets up and dukes it out from time to time. Not only to remember the thrills of fighting, but also to look back and see how much stronger he has become, physically and psychologically. Little Mac has proved that even though he's mental, he's still awesome, just like you at home. Stay awesome, and never stop using that noggin. Punchout! Punchout! It's just a small series in Nintendo's arsenal of games. You play as a tiny boxer named Little Mac, and you fight against the biggest beasts of men you've ever seen. But what drives Little Mac? What motivates him to join the WVBA? That's the West Virginia Broadcasters Association. That, has to tell you, may be the real reason. A reason that makes much more sense for a main protagonist to use as motivation. Punchout Wii is nothing more than a metaphor, taking place in the mind of Mac. But that doesn't mean that the game is only in Little Mac's mind. Heavens no. Little Mac is still a boxer. He still trains, he still fights, and he still wins championships. The only thing that we aren't seeing are his actual fights. Allow me to explain. Look at all these fighters. Not a single one of them is a simple, down-to-earth boxer, like Little Mac. None of them are, quote-unquote, normal. All of them are at a certain point in his life, and that mental problem is represented in the form of his latest in-game opponent. So let's go through his opponents and find out which mental disorders they each represent. But first, let's look at Little Mac himself. Emphasis on little, tiny, minuscule, twerp of a short person Mac. Mac doesn't Mac doesn't ever speak. He doesn't even smile all that often outside of those rare moments of victory. Due to his height and size, he was most likely teased and bullied in high school, which he's just out of, by the way. He's 17. Yeah, 17 and that ripped. Extreme stereotypes, extreme character and personalities. If we put someone like Super Macho Man in an MMA fighting ring, his personality and fighting skills would surpass even John Jones. None of these fighters are actually what Little Mac is going up against. In reality, instead of fighting Disco Kid or King Hippo, he's fighting Basic Billy and Normal Boxer Norman. But why? Why is Mac imagining this stuff? Hallucinogens? Knocked into a coma? Is there something wrong with him? Yes, actually. I believe that Mac has all sorts of problems, and each one peeks up on him in a different... Doesn't make any sense. It's actually the Washington Volleyball Academy. No? Actually, it's the World Video Boxing Association. Well, according to the various game guides, Little Mac is a very strong opportunist, and the WVBA is very beneficial to younger fighters. That seems like a less than wholesome reason for a main character. Not really something you'd want to root for. It's like cheering for your favorite sports star after he purposely crippled his rival in order to face no competition. That's taking an opportunity, and likely he's too famous to face major consequences. Well, what I'm about to